supposed to live your life. This is not the right way of doing things, and point them to what they're supposed to do, to pass judgment, right or wrong, guilty or innocent. That's what we're called to do with the brothers and sisters in the community, in the church, because it's the loving thing to do if we actually care about them. So we are supposed to judge people, but there is a right way and a wrong way of doing that. And unfortunately, so much damage that has been done by the church has happened because we've judged wrongly, poorly, and selfishly. So that's not what I'm calling us to do. That's not what the Bible is encouraging us to do. We're called to judge out of a place of love, so people can continue living in right relationship with God. And the final thing that this verse points out to us, our fourth and final point for today, is that sometimes mercy gets messy. Paul says in his conclusion to these first 5 verses that you must throw this man out and hand him over to Satan so that his sinful nature will be destroyed and he himself will be saved on the day that the Lord returns. We read this and we say, oh my, someone living in sexual sin is supposed to get thrown out of the church so that Satan can then destroy them before the Lord saves them at the end of time. And we think this is terrifying, first and foremost. This sounds very unloving, handing someone over to Satan. Isn't that the exact opposite of what we are called to do as believers? But the truth is that sometimes mercy gets messy. God is a merciful God. He gives us what we don't deserve. And what we do deserve, He doesn't give to us time and time again. He gives us forgiveness and second chances and opportunities that never should have come our way because of the way that we chose to live our lives, for the sin that we chose to indulge in. But God is merciful with us time and time again. In the Bible, in Exodus, God is described as being slow to anger. And the imagery used here is someone that has a long nose. A long nose. Because if someone had a short nose, well, their nose would flare up very quickly. And they would get angry and their nose would start to flare up. And they would be frustrated in an instant. On the other hand, someone with a long nose would be patient, gentle, merciful, giving chance after chance after chance. And this is the imagery that God is described with. He's a merciful God, a patient God, who gives us chance after chance after chance to turn away from the sexual sin that we've been living in and start to live in obedience to Him and enjoy that closeness of relationship that He always wanted to have with us. God gives us chance after chance after chance, but the truth is that at some point, those chances run out. Not because God hates us, but because God hates evil and sin. And if we're going to willingly continue to live in this way, He has to let us do those things. He has to let us live how we just want to live. Fall into the sin that we're going to fall. Ruin our lives if that's what we so desperately want to do, and we just avoid the chances that He gives us to turn our lives around. Sometimes mercy gets messy because God, being a just and loving God, will say, fine, I'm going to take my hands off of this situation and let you live the life that you so desperately want to live. And when He does that, so often we find ourselves living in destruction. And we've come to a point where we have totally ruined our lives because we so desperately wanted to do it our way. And so often our way involves sin, specifically sexual sin. This was a big part of my story personally, is that mercy got really messy for me. Because God had given me chance after chance after chance to come clean about my struggles with pornography, and chance after chance after chance to repent and turn away and seek help and find freedom and healing. And He gave me opportunities, and looking back, I see those opportunities to be truthful, to tell someone else that I would really matter to be brave even though it might hurt, to get free from this thing. He gave me chance after chance because of His mercy, And it came to a point where I was just so closed off to letting anyone know about the pornography that I had struggled with, that it just had to be brought to the light by someone finding out about it. And unfortunately, that someone was my wife. And this situation got really messy because I was being so disobedient to God. As we talked about earlier, you can choose to welcome God and reject Satan, or welcome Satan and reject God. And I look back and I realize that I had been living my life in a way that welcomed Satan and rejected God. And that brings me to the point that I realized that I wasn't living for God, that I had not been living for God. Because you can live for God or you can live for the enemy, but you can't do both at the same time. And it wasn't until about a year ago that this dawned on me in a full way, that I had to just lay my life down at God's feet. And Jesus came to me in that moment in a real and personal and vivid way that I had never experienced before. And he brought with him freedom and healing and so much mercy that I never deserved for the way that I had chose to live my life. And from that point on, I believed fully in Jesus. And more than that, I lived my life in a way that represented it. Because as believers, we're called not to just talk the talk. Say I'm a Christian. Say I prayed a prayer. Say I believe these things. We're called to live it out practically, in obedience, in rejecting sexual sin, in walking in purity and in freedom. That's how we honor God. That's how we're called to live. And that's the proof of our salvation, is working it out. We're not saved by our works. You can never do enough good works to be saved by Jesus, but you can most certainly do good works to show that Jesus has transformed your life already from a place of mercy and a place of grace. So as we wrap up this message, I encourage you to keep diving into these verses because they're challenging and they're hard. But the thing is that the person that got thrown out of the church for their sexual sin was not because God hated them. It was not because the church hated them. It was because they had chose to live their life in sin, apart from the will of God. And sometimes what has to happen is that we have to get thrown out on our own, to realize how much we've messed our life up, so that we can come back to the place where we're relying on God, where we're walking in obedience to Him, where we're returning to faithfulness to Christ. This is sometimes what has to happen, but it's not what I want to happen for us. The easier way around this, instead of getting thrown out to Satan so that our flesh can die and we can come to the lowest point in our life so that then we can finally turn back to God, instead of going down that road, I want to encourage you to choose the much easier, much more quick, light, faster, better, wonderful, easier road. And that's getting free from it when God gives us that chance and that opportunity. And I believe so deeply that God wants that for you. And I've come today to address this obstacle that may be in your life and to let you realize that this is actually serious stuff. It's stopping you from living in the fullness of relationship with God, sexual sin. And so what we have to do about it is reject it. Turn away from it. Walk in purity. Say no to the sexual sin that we have so often said yes to. But it's more than just that. It's more than just saying no. It's more than just thinking I'm not going to do it again. It's about confession. Confession means telling someone else. And I don't mean someone else that is not affected by this. You can, and that's good. It's good to get it open and to someone else. But tell it to someone who really cares. Tell it to someone who really will be there for you. Tell it to someone who can actually help you. Someone who has experience and knows what to do. Bring it to the light. Don't keep walking in darkness and secrecy. You will never, ever get past sexual sin if that is you. My final thing that I want to encourage you with is that God is so merciful. God was so merciful to me. In the height of my sin and rebellion to Him, He was so merciful to me. And He is now bringing restoration to me and to my wife. And believe me, it is a long journey. And we're not fully there yet. We are still very broken from this. but it's a progression that we are on because God is merciful towards us, and He is merciful to you as well, despite anything that you have done. So if you're at the lowest point in your life, cry out to Jesus, and I know He will show up and change your life because He did that for me. And if you're not at the lowest point in your life, but you realize I have been living in sexual sin, and I know this is stopping me and hindering me from my relationship with God, then cry out to Him. Experience Jesus in a way that you never have before. And after that personal encounter, give your life fully to Him. In love, in word, and most importantly, in obedience to what the Bible calls you to, which is purity. I don't want to beat you over the head with purity today, but I want to invite you into the beauty of the fullness of life that God has created for us. A life that can't be had when we're living in sexual sin because we're trading God's goodness for a cheap replica, but only by laying down our life, trusting in Jesus, believing in Jesus, and walking in obedience to Him. Are we able to get through this, to overcome this, to live in purity, and to be beautiful examples of God's love to all the people around us? This is my encouragement for you today. I hope you've drawn something useful and practical out of this, and I will talk to you again in a few days' time with another message as we continue this series of removing the obstacles that get in the way of us and God. God bless you.